Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Black Dress 2 Homage. For those of you who've been coming to Black Dress Talks in Brooklyn and you've never been to the Pratt Manhattan campus, welcome. I'm sure you got a chance to see that the exhibit is downstairs. So we're going to have a Black Dress talk as per usual in all its fabulousness. And and then we will be able to go downstairs and have a reception and see the exhibit, unless you've seen it before you got here this afternoon. I want to introduce myself. I am Anita Cooney. I'm the Dean of the School of Design, so I'm very, very proud for this exhibit and for this opportunity to have Black Talks here in Manhattan. And I want to go on and introduce my esteemed colleague, Professor Adrienne Jones, to please come to the stage, this podium, and tell us all about what's about to happen.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a special edition of Black Dress Talks. As Anita said, we normally meet in Brooklyn, but we've got a little special thing going on downstairs, the 10th anniversary of the Black Dress Project. So I'm excited for you. Those of you who haven't seen it, I'm excited for you to see it, but I'm really excited about today's talk. We have two very special ladies that are going to join us and talk about what I feel is the companion book to the exhibit, Black in Fashion. So I would like to introduce right now, we have the fabulous, the wonderful, both of them are fabulous and wonderful, okay. So we've got Tonya Blazio-Licorish, yay. Blaze. I like Blase. And Miss Tara Donaldson. Come on over. This is the book. And yes, I do my research, so I did read every page. I've been through every page in this amazing book. And the great thing about this book and this evening is that some of the information that is in here, you will actually be able to see pieces from it downstairs when you go downstairs. So I'm excited about that. All right, so let's just get going. I'm going to start with a real simple question. How did you come to join this project?
Well, I am in the archive. I joined WWD in 2017, the Fairchild Archive, which is under the umbrella of PMC Media. And knowing the wealth of WWD, sort of for me, it's like if someone has an archive, so I was really excited to be able to get in there. And WWD, we put a team together. We bring Tara on board with us, and we go for it. We started, I started to and the team I was working with, digging into this archives inventory. And me, I have a background in fashion, and I know WWD very well, because I lived with it my entire career, and I know that they had stuff, I just wanted to know what else they had. So we started digging, and Tara and I actually worked really closely during 2020, pulling out and looking deeper into this archive. There's one story that I wrote with another colleague, Obi Anyawu, about moving the conversation forward. And as Tara and I started to sort of coagulate the research around what Black in Fashion would be like, she reminded me, she's like, well, it seems like, we already started writing that book. So that's how, I think, I'm not going to speak for Tara, but how coming to this project, it was a very exciting moment that Women's Wear Daily, this is the book that they decide to go out first with, from their archive, because their archive is that, it is that thing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay. Tara.
I actually met Tonya before I was at WWD. I was at a sister brand, and my desk was like right outside of the archive store. And she would tell me that I looked like a certain model, and I would not name her because now that I know her, she is stunning. She's still stunning, and I'll just leave it like that. But anyway, she used to show me all the pictures, and I was just very interested because my background is in merchandising and then journalism, so I don't have a fashion history background, just an interest in it. And then when I got to WWD, I had the privilege of learning a lot of these things from her. So we would work on articles together. She'd be like, "Oh, look, this is what I found," or "Did you know this?" And I didn't know any of it. So this truly is a book that I wanted for myself as a reader. So it's really an honor to have been able to work with her on it.
And it's so timely and so necessary. As a professor who teaches in fashion and, constantly telling the students how important research is. And the fact that there was not a lot of information out there on us and our culture, this now becomes the textbook for the ages.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to show you how deeply I went into this book.
Okay.
It's no coincidence that the garment district began just blocks away from this very location.
Mhm.
Can you give us some background on the history of the New York Garment District?
Yes, a little bit.
Okay.
And I will sort of bring it back to what we were, um, because the book is 100 years of coverage. The labor portion of that book is of utmost importance, I believe. And knowing who was there. I mean, America has a large immigration population coming in, post World War I, and the garment district sort of sits here, but also 8th Avenue, and not really understanding. I went to fashion school too, so I know exactly what you mean by the resources and the information that you sort of desire to understand, but those are not in a book or not sort of talked about a lot enough. I wouldn't say a lot, but not enough. And the labor force that is America, that brings forth a garment industry, um, is pivotal to New York City. It had employed more than 500,000 people by the 1980s. 90s. And so when we looking at that background that WWD captures around 1912, 16, where they, these are things I would tell Tara. I'm like, guess what I found today? I mean, usually that was the conversation. You know what I found today? I can't believe that they have that there. A manifest of who was working in the garment district by women, mostly women, and by race and culture. And Black women or Caribbean women, West Indian women are number 6 on that list. But they had a manifest of that. And that tells me how closely WWD is watching through their lens this industry that is burgeoning. They will watch all of it from that point forward. And also the fact that the garment industry, we understand the labor unions and the garment disputes, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fires. And, I think we don't know everything. We never know everything that was going on. But the fact that, there were protests. There were protests for Black women in this industry getting fair wages and fair treatment. Those things sort of resonated with us when you're looking at the body of this work and really synthesizing how WWD's lens is like it gets wider and wider. And for a book like this, I think that's where, I found much appreciation, more appreciation for who I know WWD to be. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say something that was really compelling was really how far-reaching WWD's coverage was. And especially when you fast forward to today, not like today, the last couple of months, like maybe last year today,
Right.
we're still kind of fighting for that kind of visibility, that kind of coverage. And WWD was in so many places that we saw that they covered a school fashion show at an all-Black school. And, you wouldn't think most publications would do that today. So it really was important to see that it was just about fashion. It was just about the business of fashion and whatever
No matter
was
where it came
relevant.
from.
no matter where it came from or who it was. And I think that was something nice to see.
Yeah, and that, just adding to that, what we did for I think when we think about how we needed to look at the coverage and how it synthesizes what was going on. You see WWD following the Great Migration, that is sort of the biggest labor force that will come to the north and sort of spread out, and how cities become these urban oases. It's because all this labor, people are moving around, and opportunities, right? Those opportunities that present themselves on a broader scale to people of color. People of color. I mean, the manifest didn't list just Black people; it listed
Right.
every culture. And I think what begins to become so appreciative of WWD is something that we talked about, and I was like, this is interesting. Who is WWD? And they tell you right away.
Mhm.
We are going to have the most succinct coverage of this industry. And that meant that their scope of looking was not based on any bias to me. It was based on what was really
What was
happening. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Very, very important. So the book, Black in Fashion, covers a time period from 1910 to the present day. What era of this book was most important to you, of most interest, and why?
I'm gonna let Tara go first.
Okay.
All of it was interesting to
Yeah.
me. A lot of it was new for me, but I think I was particularly drawn to the 1940s because that was a time when dance was having a greater influence on fashion. And Pearl Primus, who was from Trinidad and Tobago, which is where my family's from, and Catherine Dunham were of particular note, and she had studied across the Caribbean. So um, through choreography and costuming, they both, put Caribbean styling, Caribbean influence more front and center in fashion. Um, so that was just a moment of pride for me. And I think the other part of that decade that I thought was really interesting was in 1946, we see the Black model agency, Branford, and then NAFAD, the Black Design Collective in 1949. And it just feels like, I would not have known we were organizing ourselves in that way. I know we've always worked for ourselves, but like it's just, it's something that we still need. To see that it was being done that early, was just, thought that was really cool.
Every decade was, it's like every single one. I think also for me, I'm gonna start in the beginning because Josephine Baker was someone who we know, we all know, we all have a sort of sense of who she was via what we understand of her banana skirt moment. But that is not all of Josephine. So that sort of takes us to, I think that first chapter, we decide, like Josephine, oh no, she's the one. Like she's gonna be she's the one. WWD's look at Josephine is, and particularly to me, different and interesting. Makes her so much more interesting to me. From the 20s to where they leave off with her like right before she's gonna pass, and they talk to her different. They see her differently. They will see her behind, on the stage, but not the one. She's not the one.
Mm-hmm.
But they are going to talk to their audience through their document or their, readership, and their editors are going to say, but you should probably pay attention to that one.
She could not be ignored.
She could not be ignored, but also that they knew that they sort of take it in and go, wait a second, this one. And then immediately after that, she'll go to Paris and she will already make a statement. She has something, I think, that we talk about, and I saw this probably a year before we decide this book is going to happen. She has a hosiery color, and in that timeline, hosiery is not an accessory for women; it's a necessity. You can't leave your house without it. But she will have a color named after her, and that's really early.
Yes.
I can only say from my own experience as a young late woman, and my mom saying, "Oh, Haynes, you're way. They finally have colors for my skin tone," you know. And then when I saw that about Josephine, I was like, "Wait a minute, like this is very early."
Right,
And her influence is so that, right?
right.
Um, and the more we start looking her up, you know, and what she says, it's like, I don't want to go. What did she say? I don't want to.
She's basically like, oh, that I did that.
I-
Oh, that thing. Oh, I did that first. That was me.
That was
And,
me.
you know, you feel her energy in that
Right.
article. It's
Yeah.
really cool.
And then I want to go on. I don't want to look at the past. I just want to go on and on.
Right.
And she goes on and on. She's actually probably one of the biggest influences fashion has amongst other people, you know, of the time. But for me, just to capture this question, I think the 70s for me will be my most favorite moment. And it is that moment that WWD, it's 1968, and we find this little, because WWD, if anyone knows about WWD, illustration was really a huge part of their mechanism to talking about fashion and bringing fashion to their readership. And all through WWD's timeline, there are so many magnificent illustrators like Glenn Tunstall, who worked with them and is one of the only Black illustrator that was ever there. But in the group of those men and women that create this conversation, a lot of them told me we did an article on the illustrators, and they were like, yeah, they would send us out, you know, we'd go out to these events and we'd have to sketch on right there.
Right there.
Right. So we find an article, a little illustration that says, "It's all so now." This is 1968. So we're right at the cusp of the 70s. And I think what's really amazing about that moment is that that event was in Bed-Stuy at Restoration Plaza. And that the whole of fashion is saying, hey, why isn't everybody together? Like, we are together. This is fashion. And then you sort of see the 70s create this, I think, very beautiful moment in time for fashion where, yes, it's everybody, it's everything. It's everything that I think sort of the way we looked at the book and sit the 70s almost right in the center so that you could see the past, the present, and this moment that sort of creates an influence across time continuously.
Right.
And that is, yeah, that's one of my favorite moments in the book. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, they're all our favorite moments.
Right.
That was also
But
the hardest
that's the
decade
hardest
to
decade.
work on because we wanted to put everything in. There was so much.
Yeah. Yeah, and so recently I was, you know, we were talking about, we recently did an article on the Black model movement because it is a movement. And just, you know, understanding women's wear daily's lens and their purview on this industry as a whole. I'm sure everyone in here knows the Battle of Versailles. It is not an empty question, and everyone, it's, you know, the moment. But before that moment, like WWD they already knew that the Black model was now.
Right.
You know, and those moments for Women's Wear Daily, you know, the appreciation for how they carry on documenting. So like, I think beautifully the role of fashion on culture, politics, and the social, you know, conversation. And that's across a really wide breadth of information. Yeah, because it's 365. So that too was like, I think every time we got together, we're like, wait a minute, it's like so much, there's so much we didn't put in the book.
So I'm just going to take a moment and do my little commercial for the book. And
We like commercials.
as a book collector, one of my many collectors, and I think we all have beautiful coffee table books at our home that we, you know, lay around to make it look more, you know, interesting in the home. This was a page turner. This could have actually been, you know, the next great novel, except, oh, this is real. And so yes, I started reading it as research for this talk, but then it became, oh, wait a minute. And I was talking to Tonya and I said, I feel bad because, you know, I know I'm gonna write through this book. And she said, so buy another one. And that's exactly what I did. And it's okay, because I really did go through every page. And then,
Let's see,
Oh.
sorry.
and then, you read something on page, let's see, on page 140, and then it references something, and then you have to go back and look at page 70. So
So we did
just
great.
brava, brava. So, you just talked about, you touched on, the Black model. You have some slides? You want to do your slides now?
We can show them while we're talking. I mean, I'm sure you're probably
Okay.
recording this now as a Zoom, but that's fine because I think people are watching, but we'll show them out.
Okay, all right.
Because we did bring you some.
So again, just letting you know, I did a deep dive. So the Black middle class consumers began to emerge during the 1950s as their spending dollars became more important to the economy. How does that tie in with the importance of the Black mannequin and its effect on the Black consumer? And you can talk about it then and how it affects us now.
I'm gonna talk about it from the article that we just released in this celebration of Black History Month. And then I'm gonna let Tara talk about the back, because we discovered it so early in a part of time that we didn't think it actually would have existed, but it's there. It's solidarity, so that, it's, so I think when we think about what's happening on the runway or what happened on the runway, we course through time. You see this moment where 73, there's an article, it's called 73 Movers. And it's probably every model that anyone in this room sort of may recognize: Alba Chen, Pat Cleveland, Beth Ann Hardison, Peggy Smith, all of them, Beverly Johnson and Norma Jean Darden. And I think what is really interesting about that, just that specific time of their coverage, is they understood. They talked about, the Branford Modeling Agency in the 40s when it begins after a first show with all Black models. And then they talked to the economy of the Black dollar in 1968. And all of that sort of circumvents, I think, the Black is Beautiful moment, right? Sort of brings that sort of right into the fore of their coverage. After the Civil Rights Movement, Black Power movement, you move into this moment of like the Black is Beautiful timeline. And that they were right there on the moment. I think about Naomi Sims in that space as one of the most beautiful models. Even Halston said, she was a Black queen. That's why. That's why she was so important to the Black community.
I just want to interject there.
Yeah.
because Some of the descriptions we got when interviewing her.
Oh,
her
yeah, they
friends,
were amazing.
They said she looks like satin, and then the next person came right after that and said she looked like onyx. And it's like, those are really palpable descriptions.
Right.
Right. And how then, Danielle Luna would be early on. But they're at the same time almost. They sort of get to a crescendo right at the same moment. Both on really important covers. Danielle will make her way into Paris, and first cover is, British Bazaar and then British Vogue. And then Naomi at the same time is in America. She's on Life magazine, and she's on Ladies Home Journal. And she's a Halston egg, and that sort of takes us to, this moment where visibility is so much more important. You can't forget Ebony Fashion Fair. You can't forget that timeline because that will start in the 40s. But then you see sort of like WWD will do it again. Like one of the first times they look at the Black model is first Branford Agency. Then in 1968, there's this whole article we found that we were like, wait, they're talking to the model about the moment. And not skirting anything, it's what's happening. Right. And they're saying that, in the 60s, this was sort of tokenism. They felt bringing the Black face, more of Black advertisement to the Black consumer. But it's fashion, it's consumer driven, right? It's not to forget that the business of the business. But positioning the Black model inside of their coverage, I think is really so important to understanding what they were seeing on the runway, what was actually happening to the Black consumer, the Black dollar, and the spending power that was coming. Right. So yeah, that's sort of in a nutshell. And then, you know, we see it move away, and then you see the advocacy come in. Like, so we can't stop advocating for the inclusivity.
Right.
Because fashion is, like they say, that fashion is for everyone, right? It's everybody now.
That's what we were told.
That's right. So, yeah.
I think, you know, visibility is still something we're fighting for today. And
Absolutely.
before things got overly performative or whatever you want to call it, and everybody was putting a Black model in their advertising, you know, we know what it feels like when a brand is advertising their products and all the models look the same and they don't look like us. You feel like that thing is not for you. And I think that's the point. Like, a lot of this came out of a column called Lester Gaba Looks at Display in WWD. And it's a great series of columns because WWD was already known for being thought-provoking, but he is also particularly that way. And he's pointing out, like, they have money and they're spending it in your stores. Why can't they see themselves reflected? And he talks about having traveled to Brazil as early as, I think it was 1946 or 1948,
1946.
and seeing Black mannequins in the stores there. So then he comes back and he's like, why can't we have that? At some point, he was pushing for a Black mannequin made in Lena Horne's likeness.
Yeah.
It's like, she was the most beautiful woman of that time period. Why not just do that? But he also goes on to kind of push stores to think about it. And someone did it
Campaign. He's gonna go on a
before.
campaign.
Someone did it before
Blumenthal's.
Bergdorf's, Blumenthal's.
Yes.
But they were like
Blumenthal's.
one, like it was like a one-off. And then Bergdorf's did it in '64, I think.
Yeah.
And he said, bravo, Bergdorf's. But that did not change everything.
No.
It was still, you know, and there were articles saying, you know, from department stores, I think Nordstrom put one in, and they were like, we're expecting protests. And that was in the 60s. And then the first time Bloomingdale's did it was in 1988. And that's because J.J. Thomas said, who was the affirmative action coordinator, he said he had been pushing them for years and years and years. And in 1988 was when they got Black mannequins. That was just the other day.
Right.
Right.
You know, I almost want to ask the question, what is the fear? But that's for another conversation, another talk.
But
'cause-
that article where they said we're expecting protests, that was the
Right.
fear.
That was
Because
the fear.
people would, you know, I guess what they felt was their primary customer was
Where you
not
weigh-
going to like
Be
it.
offended.
Yeah. Are you weighing the North and the South?
Right.
Where the South is still like sort of beholden to that customer or that idea of the racial inequality that still exists there for such, you know, like time, right? And I think I think with Lester Gaba, like when we read his articles, I found those articles like one really late night, and I'm like, what? Let me follow this guy. Who's Lester Gaba? And he wasn't sort of what people would call an eccentric at that time, right? He was this architect of the visual display. He had created his own mannequin. He was already sort of this person, and that he went on a campaign through that column, I thought was so clever because he's asking the industry. He's also, like I think Tara said one time, he's actually putting everybody on the spot. Like, he's daring you. Who's gonna do it?
Right.
Who's gonna do it? And Bloomingdale, they did do it. They were the only store in Harlem that faced protests themselves because they didn't have enough Black workers. And the protests started coming, and they're like, we're gonna do it. But then it wasn't a Black mannequin, it was a painted
White
mannequin
mannequin painted
painted
black.
right? So then,
We didn't have time to order the Black
no,
man.
but there
Nobody
were
was
like,
making them.
nobody was making them, and there
Right.
wasn't one. But then there is one mannequin maker that still exists. They're in Los Angeles. I looked them up, and they created the first Black mannequin. And everybody's gonna follow them. And then you also have to remember, like Lena Horne, like, what is the connection for the Black community?
Mm-hmm.
So J.J. Thomas did, make light that, he sent Tookie Smith to get her body casted.
Mm.
Then you have Danielle Luna in 1976. She was a mannequin. They make that announcement in WWD, and Iman would follow, and Munya, and those models, so that representation sort of still, I think, is complicated at a place, But I think for Women's Wear Daily, the beauty of their coverage is that synced conversation of, well, we're gonna like allow our editor, our writers to put it in your face. Because you're reading the daily every day.
A deeper dive.
Right,
Yes.
right. And
Absolutely.
most editors have followers, right? So Les DeGallo was that, they really went on a campaign. It was really great to see that in the paper.
Good moment.
Yeah,
Good moment.
really good.
We need to bring it back.
Yes.
All right. In a book of this size and the depth that you went into, what were some of the challenges? You mentioned some, but what were some of the challenges you faced while researching and getting this book produced?
I think, it's a research project of this magnitude is about staying true to the document.
Mm.
It's very important for when we got together, we talked to the team, Jim Fallon, and, there's going to be a document of the document. It's not me or Tara saying this or putting, your opinion on it, because it's important that the document exists as it existed. In that way, there's language, right? There is a course of ID to Black people, and we didn't want to leave that out. We wanted to keep that there because those descriptors allow us to sort of see a movement through time, right? Of who we are, where we are, how this is sort of being taken in. And what I will say to this audience is that for me, I was so impressed, really honestly, by the content, by the documentation. Whether, it's a difficult conversation or an easy conversation, it still was there, right? Some of the things that because I was looking a lot longer probably than Tara, just going like, what? Where do we start, right? How do we start? Who's there? Who's going to be important? This is how Josephine, so we start, we decide, we make a really pointed decision that this book will celebrate. It will be here to celebrate. Yes, the document that is WWD and the documentation that they so carefully sort of stewarded, right? Because I too was a fashion student, and I said the same thing. The book that, needed to be on the shelf. Like, I think this is a book that needed to be on the shelf, because when we go early, every time I would, Tara was like, oh, you know what I found today? You know what I found today? Oh my God, in 1912, like, Black, talk about visibility. There's already a conversation about Black dolls and that representation for young Black kids, or the first colored only boutique.
Yes.
Those things are like, yeah, I want to know that, I think a fashion person or anyone digging into history or just being curious, you want to have sort of a body of information. And WWD to me, because I can only speak to it from my own experience, because like you, I had, anyone in fashion, you sort of live with this paper like on a daily, and you need it. If you don't have it, you feel like you don't know what's happening. Right. And so much of that was my appreciation for this book, right? And being able to really sort of be the steward of that conversation. The document speaks to itself as why it was called the Bible, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so appreciative of this. I know when I started doing research for the Black Dress Project, it wasn't like there hadn't been other exhibitions.
Right.
But when the exhibitions were gone, the information went with it as well.
Right.
And so there was always the need to start all over again. And that's another reason why this book is so important, because the information is here and it will always be here.
Right.
So thank you, ladies, again. I'm gonna keep saying that.
I'll let Tara tell you what, I think, probably she can shed light on how, like, researching and producing this sort of book. I mean, it was days and nights and days and nights and days and nights, but it was at the end, as we sort of see it coming together, I was like, wow, yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm like you. I was rereading in preparation for this. I'm like, this is good. And we did, it's just like the thing of what you're saying is there were documents, there were things, obviously all the stuff that was in WWD, but it's not until you put it together in this one place that you can really feel the weight of the impact of our influence, of our presence. So I think that's something that I love about the book. But from a practical standpoint, it was an impressively short timeline that we had to get this done. And the only reason it was possible was because this book was already brewing in her head before we started. But I think the other hardest part, because we had beautiful conversation with so many people.
Yeah.
I think it was, a gift, an honor to be treated to those stories, but also for people to feel so comfortable. They definitely told us things that could not be in the book.
Right, could not be in the book.
But I think, having to condense, we would talk to people for 2 hours and then we have to bring that down to like 400 words.
Right.
And, having to cut was the hardest part for me because you know the stuff that's in your heart and in your mind from these conversations. You can't put it all in, but I think
Yeah.
we did the best.
We'll wait for
could.
volume 2.
There's definitely enough information.
Yeah, the voices.
Mm-hmm.
The voices were pivotal too. Yeah, to us, we were like, okay, but we have to, like, I think I was probably saying to Tara, we have to call this person. We have to get to that person, and who's the photographer and who are these people, and like, shine a light, just shine a light on as many people. But she's right. I mean, I'm gonna say that Highland Booker was probably one of my not that anybody else was bad, but he was probably like the most genuine. Didn't know really a lot about Highland Booker, and most people don't even know who he is, right? But he is going to be one of the first black couturiers.
Yes.
He's going to reopen the House of Worth. When he talks to us about his experience, it is really just amazing. And then connecting, I'm going to tell this audience, some people in here are from Detroit, that we would talk to everyone and say, so where are you from? Oh, I'm from Detroit. And we'd say, don't tell us you went to Cass Tech. I mean, like, everybody went to Cass Tech.
There was some
including
magic
Ben
happening there.
Tunstall, which is it's like a magic. I was like, this was a magic place. Like, do you guys know? Like, you have a story to write, because so many people went to that school and then come to New York and then, really lead into the fashion industry. Yeah, it's an interesting.
Very interesting place.
Right. And then I'm gonna then talk about George Chinsey in here. Gonna have to talk about George because George Chinsey is still with Women's Wear Daily.
Wow.
Yes, he's been with the brand for 45 years, and his capture and his the stories that he can tell you about his experience and about this sort of being in this industry from a different perspective. That was the other thing that I think, importantly, beyond the text that we, sort of extrapolate and put in and give to the reader, is the photographer. And looking in the lens, I look at the lens and behind it and beyond it, because every picture has a story to tell. And in the time of a capture, it always to me is then who's looking? Because in this book, 10 years from now, someone else could be looking and see something really different, entirely different, right? So I think that the beauty of the photographer and the way that, I'm gonna always say, the WWD's lens that they have, the writer, the editor, and the photographer, that sort of coming together and creating these like really amazing, pictures and stories and I will say to most people in this room, lots of the images here, nobody had ever seen them before. Because, you know, if you see WWD on a daily, if you're reading it, not everything gets in the paper.
Right.
So that was also like always for us, like, what? I've never
Finding
seen
your
that.
own gold
Finding
mile.
right, finding, yeah, it's like a gold mine,
Yeah.
like a present every single time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very nice. And you know I can relate, but
Yeah.
again, that's another story. Um, last question before we open it up to the audience. What was your most surprising discovery?
I'm gonna go first just because it piggybacks on Highland Booker. I think the thing that was most surprising for me was how little his contemporaries knew of him. You know, he was out there doing beautiful work. And we would interview other people and ask them, were they familiar with him? And so many people said no. And it's just like he was just over there doing his thing. But the thing that I loved about that interview too is that, you know, we talk about imposter syndrome, but he did not have that. He
Yeah.
didn't have that.
Yeah.
He just said, I was doing things we all should have been able to do regardless of our color. And we have that in there as a quote. You know, and it was just exactly the right point. He was just doing good work. He was doing beautiful work, and nothing else really should have mattered. And I love that approach. But yeah, a lot of it was surprising for me because I was learning a lot of it fresh. So
Surprising to me really is Josephine's legacy
Mm-hmm.
in fashion, having her likeness on a handkerchief. So it just
Right.
all felt like what? Also, I'm gonna say that when we got to the 80s, right? I knew Byron, I knew so many of those designers in the 90s, but also the power of women in hip hop culture.
Mm-hmm.
Those ladies who sort of tutor the image and the style of the moment. And I think that we were talking about, well, wait a minute, we'd say, oh no, well, this is Women's Wear Daily. So we're gonna give that to the women of hip hop, these women who sort of take that, and style this moment and make this moment be a catalyst to a further conversation going forward. That was one of my, like, sort of not surprising, but just like we could do that for that moment. But there are so many moments in the book that surprise me yet, but not,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm advertising for WWD because I know who they were. I was reading them all the time. Whether there's when we launched the book at Rizzoli, we had a conversation with Jeffrey Banks, and I wanted, we're talking about visibility and who was captured in the paper. And I think he made a really good point about noting that, fashion is a business. That's one thing we can't forget. So it's not about who wasn't. That's not it. I think it's that together, we could all look at this conversation as fluid.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's 100 years, and we left so much out, that's the thing.
Right.
I was just telling Tara, like, I found this the other day, like, there's still so much that, and it's a conversation that I think fashion has to understand. Like, it's fluid. This is a conversation that's fluid. It's not a side.
Right.
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 So hopefully, I do hope that the book gives the onus to the industry and readers of fashion and the school of fashion to sort of pick it up and know that you have to talk about all of it. Yeah.
You can't, in the time we're in now and trying to erase so much of who we are and where we've been. But that leaves big giant holes that cannot be explained until you put us back into the conversation.
Right.
So I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm so glad that we were able to do this around the same time. Like when I first got the news that the book was coming out, I was like, we have to call, I said, Rochelle, we have to call him right now. We have to call him right now and pin them down because we need them. And our first conversation together was what, 4 hours?
4 hours. Yeah.
You know, just sharing information back and forth. And well, you'll see when you go downstairs that we follow each other. And that whole thing that you said about research, we would find one thing, dig to get a little more information and fall into this deep hole of information and the idea of what do we keep, what do we don't, what do we do? And then this came along.
Yeah. And we were like, sadly, I think for Tara and I, we were like, wow, we're over our like word count in chapter 1. Right. For the whole book.
For the whole book,
Like,
for the whole
wait.
book.
It was not easy, not at all.
It could not have been, but
No.
so very much appreciated.
Yeah, we have to thank, the team that sort of rallied around us. Because in the time that we had, it was a pressure cooker, really, not to even be light about it. We had a great editor with Union Square, Barbara Berger and Jim Fallon and the team at WWD. And even, how much photography. I mean, if you could imagine, we spent hours looking at images and making sure that, I think that when I look back at the book now, I go, it's so joyful. Like all the pictures feel like it's alive,
Yes.
the book is alive. And I don't think that it was such a narrow window. So to sit down and really think about how to curate that, even the span of the model. So those were a conversation. We're like, how do we get all the people in? Can we get everybody, as many people as possible? And so you see that we, creating galleries and, working to like the timelines. Sort of, Tara brought that up. She's like, this is a good idea. Let's do these timelines. And then we can get so much more information in here that we
was
wouldn't
great.
be able to do.
That was great.
Yeah.
So it's like the little
The tidbits.
extra mentions, yeah.
But the tidbits are so important. Those articles help to synthesize the decade,
Mhm.
every decade, I don't think we could have done the book without those timelines, sort of, creating a picture that's so really full. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then we left it open. I'm going to say that now.
Yes, you can. You can. And like I
We
said,
brought it to 2020.
we will patiently wait for
Yeah.
volume 2.
Brought it to 2020 so we could leave it open for another generation
Yes.
going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Michelle, do we have time for some questions? Okay.
That was glorious. Thank you so much. I may have heard something you said at the beginning. Is everything that's in the book, was that published in WWD, or were there articles that you'd found that?
Well, everything was published. So it's a document of the document.
Right.
It is, every decade, as we go through every decade, we are, thinking about what is this decade? What are they talking about? What is documented in WWD? I think that's the beauty of the book, that it is a document of the document. It is nothing. It is more than that, but around that too, like how you research and you sort of synthesize into bringing someone into the conversation.
Mm.
And documenting WWD as probably, this is the first time that a book like this sort of sits as I think as a privilege to fashion and the reader that knows WWD. We didn't take anything from their we didn't realign it, or that wasn't the purpose of the book. It really was the archive is so important. This archive, the Fairchild Archive, it's so important to fashion's history.
Mm.
It really is fashion's history. It could tell it like no one else can. And documenting it from this purview, just looking at this culture. I mean, imagine everything else that is just sitting within the paper. So it's important that I think the reader and the person that purchases this book understands that we documented the document. That was the goal.
Right. No, that's fantastic. Because I mean, I suppose I was curious if there was as you were going through the archives, was there anything that, for whatever reason, might have been cut or edited out? You know,
For us, well, we had how many pages?
Lots of things.
We left a lot of,
Edited out,
we
yeah.
had to take things out. We had to, not eliminate, but we had to do an edit. And we also had to focus. Where was our focus going to be? What was the purpose of the book for the reader, for fashion, for aggregating a look at Black creatives in an industry? And the biggest word for us was joyful, was that it needed to celebrate that contribution and look at this document through a celebration. That was really important. But the images is what I said. Not these images, most of them have not been published.
that's
Yeah.
right.
Well,
Okay.
The
Yeah.
other thing is, in supplement to the document.
There were some.
We did fresh interviews. because
Yeah.
The other thing, this was something we talked about just on a personal level. So many of these creatives are still here.
Yeah.
Let's hear from them while we
Yeah.
can hear from them and put their stories down. It's like for our
Yeah.
ancestors.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah,
so
because
there
you
are-
could bring the voices in.
Yes,
you should.
fresh interviews
Yeah.
in there, but always drawing back to what we had covered, what WWD had covered about them, but
Yeah.
like to let them tell their own story.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Hey, first of all, thank you. Like, this is beautiful, awesome. I'm a designer in LA, and I went to Fashion Institute, a design and merchandising in Los Angeles. Hey. And I have a BA in economics, I have A in fashion design. I've been working in the industry as a fit technician, senior pattern maker, senior technical designer since about 2012. So I'm in the industry as well. I have clothing lines, went to school, but I'm always wondering, what were we doing?
Yeah.
They're never telling us what we were doing. So it's really nice to have this. I'm definitely getting the book. Is it for sale today?
QR code if it's working. Okay, great. There you go.
And it'll ship to us.
Yes.
And then so what is the publisher? Fairchild is the publisher.
No, Union Square is the publishing.
So what were they saying about Fairchild?
Fairchild. It is the Fairchild Archive.
Okay.
Women's Wear Daily.
Is it virtual or is it tangible on paper? Where were you guys looking through?
Well, WWD has been around for more than 115 years plus as a physical document, a paper, a journal, as a trade journal. So you picked it up like you picked up the New York Times,
Right.
right? It is now digital. It went digital in 2001. And now it's completely digital, right? So you can subscribe. And,
Right. I mean, I've heard of it before.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize that it was basically a database, essentially, is kind of what I'm understanding.
Well, I wouldn't say that it is a database. I think it is a collective
Information,
reporting agency on this industry.
fact-based data is
right.
what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Like
it's
a reference.
watching an industry right on the ground as
Right.
everything is happening. It is, succinct, like it says in its coverage around social, political, fashion, everything that's
Right.
happening around and is fashion. That's WWD 365 days of the year.
Thank
in
you.
continuum, yeah.
Because when you said that there was a list of
We did-
races,
well-
at first we were like, huh?
Yes,
But then hearing that, like you said, good, bad, whatever, it was there.
right.
So that's to be respected, and I'm just really excited to get the book. So thank you.
You're welcome.
To answer your
Sure.
question though, we're doing all the things.
Yeah, we're doing
all the
everything.
things in all the places. And
Yeah.
I think that was something that was so cool about the book, because it's like these big fashion houses.
Yeah, we have,
didn't think that we were there, but we were creative directors.
Right.
We were right one step down, the main decision maker. We were everywhere.
the industry all day, so I can't wait to read this, and because I never see us.
well, the other thing is that
Talk
we,
about us.
yeah, we do, we definitely, you'll see it in the book. We go behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Purposefully and importantly, especially because in the 90s, the Black designer goes behind the scenes. There are a lot of designers that you might not even have known they were around, but they were around making big things happen. And that too, I think, we looked at all of it, and that's what I think makes the book really sort of
Yeah,
great.
Highland Booker
Oh,
was
that
new
was
to me.
great.
I can't
Yeah.
wait to go check that
There
out.
might be a lot of people new.
Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah. I also just want to say something to this audience. I think Tara and I talked about, we didn't want to use the word hidden because the information has not been hiding. It's just you have to sort of dig in and look for it. Not look for it, but have an interest in looking and finding it. Yeah. Hi.
Hi, I'm Harriet Cole, and I'm the wife of George Tinsey, who is, I just want to say about him for a moment because he is the only photographer left
Yes.
at Women's Wear. There used to be many photographers on staff. He is a Black photographer, Jamaican photographer, the only one. There are a lot of onlys in this industry, and I'm curious though, after honoring him, what did the leadership of Fairchild say, of WWD say, when you aggregated all of this information and then the reality, oh, we've done a good job of covering these people.
I think I could say Jim Fallon and I worked really closely together on capturing the outline in the beginning. And in our conversations, both of us, I would say, Jim, do you know that this is in the paper? Do you know that you covered this? Do you have any idea? Like, I think too, like he's been there too, almost as long as George, and really would know the body of Women's Wear Daily, its history and how it was covering. And he, was very honest with me. And he goes, actually, I'm not like me. I think he sort of you sit with it and you go, well, it's not a real surprise. It is also it's sort of a great thing to know. And I think after this book came together, he had read everything. Of course, he had his eyes on everything that we wrote, and he was like, "Yeah, this is good. This is wonderful. It's wonderful that we actually have all this, and that as you research and you're, pulling up little tidbits, like some of the articles are 2 sentences. Some like, I'd find way down at the bottom of a column and I'm like, did we know this was happening? Did you know this was happening? And I think it is sort of a stark reality to a trade journal. There was no, not this, not that. It's everything. And then you think about John B. Fairchild's timeline, right? If anybody knows WWD, then you know John B. Fairchild, not the myth, the man, right? And how he's capturing and considering and thinking. Now, I think fashion comes to a place where it becomes very curated in the content of that it is. But we did have the conversation, where do we start? Do we start in the 60s? Can we go there? Do we go way to the beginning? And that's when I was like, let me do some research. Let me do some digging and see how early can we go. And that we land right at 1910, really at their beginning. I think that was a moment of like, oh yeah, that's really good.
I mean, it's a proud moment. I remember you and I talking about the book when you very first started. And I don't know that even as much research as you had done, that you realized that it was so extensive.
Yeah, no.
And I just want to say another thing to the young lady over here. I'm glad you said trade.
Yeah.
WWD is a trade publication, and that is covering the business, which is why everything should be in there
Right, exactly.
about the business. And the
Right.
fact that it is and it was, and that you show us
Right.
that in fact the documentation has been there from the beginning is very gratifying, especially in this environment where we are now,
Right.
where it seems that erasure is interesting to people,
Mhm.
that it is printed
Right.
in that publication.
And that it was
Thank you for
there. Right.
unearthing it and making us know that.
Yeah, and that is there, and it's always there. And I think also when you consider time and that WWD, yes, it is a trade publication, but as fashion is in the zeitgeist the moments and the movements are there too. The social context of everything and people and street style, that idea of they are wearing, it starts to sort of percolate in WWD's purview in 1916. I mean, that's so early that they say they are wearing. That is a construct of them looking and seeing and watching the Fairchild family, you know, because WWD is not the only publication that sort of sits in the timeline of who they are. DNR is there, FN, Footwear News is still here. They capture this thing called fashion, you know. Monumentally, I think the social scroll too is so important also to their documentation, because who's happening, who's around. That's how Josephine gets in their purview. You know, that's how Lena Horne gets into their conversation, and someone like Ethel Waters, when we're looking for who's going to be the first, where's the first representation of Black people, it will be Ethel Waters. It's 1936, and it's, you know, an illustration of her in costume of a very important play that she's in. But they were looking, I think we talked about how we look at fashion, right, for a long time. How do you see fashion in a moment where you don't have an internet? You don't even have a television. So where do you see it? You see it on the Broadway stage. You're going to see it at the Harlem Review. Someone like Gladys Bentley. And then I think for everyone here, what Tara and I were looking at was like, wait, how do we see this then, now? And we see it then, now. Like Rihanna and Josephine. Josephine is here in the 1920s, and Rihanna's an entire century later. Sort of the same idea of this influence, you know, and that those things, like every time we looked at it, we're like, this is so good. You know, it's sort of nice to see it and let the reader see this constant conversation. Not only do WWD's lens, but fashion itself. Yeah.
Hello,
Hi.
my name is Jelani Bendele. I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about fashion illustrators during that time, as Harriet pointed out about George being one, if not the only, Black photographer at women's wear. And so I'd like to hear a little bit more. I know who was the first illustrator at women's wear, but
Yeah.
I'd like to know if there were others within this time period that
Of
you're
course.
writing.
We can't not talk about Glenn Tunstall. Glenn so warmly availed himself to us, me like 5 times before we even got to this book, and for the book. And he really, you know, he talked about the moment that how he got to WWD, the idea of being, for all the illustrators and the construct of the timeline, and what they were dealing with. And he, as the only Black illustrator there, but he did, you know, Glenn sits, every illustrator WWD has very distinct, their work and their ID in the paper is very distinct. Glenn sort of, if no one knows, yeah, want to show maybe. He has such a beautiful way of illustrating women and fashion with this soft, like charcoal work that he did. And also that he, you know, all of them talked about not getting in or not having access or being denied the access or being questioned about who they are and why they were somewhere. But he, I think, sits to tell a story of this opportunity for a Black illustrator in a major publication. Glenn also illustrated a lot for women, for W, which was the sister publication to WWD. And I think for an appreciation of his work, really looking through WWD's archive, I went to his house and I said, do you know how many times you were on the cover of Women's Wear Daily? And he said, no, I don't. I didn't even think about it. And I'm like, well, you should think about it. Because it's really important. I found the conversation the illustrators have with the document is also sort of profound because we get to see what they're seeing. The idea that Black models are the changing of or the manipulation of what should be, in the paper or at the time, I think in the timeline that he's there, the difficulties of that conversation, I think, are necessary to have. And we allowed him to, all of it is in the book. We let everybody tell us what they wanted to tell us, and sort of synthesize that around who they were in the timeline. I think Glenn Tunstall is a prolific illustrator. His work should be known, because there were many illustrators that come through WWD, as there were photographers, but that he was the only Black illustrator there, I think is very important.
I just want to add something about Glenn, and stop me if I misremember, but he went on to illustrate beyond WWD, and he talked about, because they're there sketching live, he said, in these other places, not WWD, which, which he was able to indicate that he had more ability
Freedom.
to draw the truth at WWD, but he was saying he'd be in front of these beautiful Black women, he'd sketch them the way he saw them, and then he'd submit illustrations, and then they'd be like, can you change the nose? Can you change the, this is too big, this is too pronounced. And that's just, like, that gives me chills just to think about that, the reality of all the things that was happening. But
he didn't have to do that with Women's Wear Daily. They sort of had the carte blanche that they were illustrators that was respected of the work that they did. And I think that goes for what is documented in Women's Wear Daily. If you're considering timelines and the harsh realities of social and racial politics in America, that is, sort of, this is what's happening. This is the civil rights movement. This is what's happening. This is us, interviewing Martin Luther King, that we were like, they interviewed Martin Luther King. They interviewed Bobby Seals, or Shirley Chisholm, as a matter of fact. And, her entire campaign is documented within WWD's lens. Yeah. Hi.
Hi, thanks so much for this wonderful talk. I'm so glad to be here today. I wondered about this process of looking at all of these images and going through all of these articles. And this question could be for either of you or both of you. Wonder how this process of going through this research has impacted, if it has, how you look at either this industry today or the coverage of this industry today.
I'm going to say one thing before we go. I'm going to let Tara go first, though. I want to mention Jean Griffin, for anyone who knows Women's Wear Daily. She was also the first Black and only Black art director. So in the 70s, when we see Andre Leon Talley, they are together. And as Andre is a part of Women's Wear Daily, so is Jean, and her vision and their vision, and all of them said the same thing. Basically, nobody said no to what we were doing, to make sure that they're covering the breadth of an industry. And I think that is important. Does this document change how I think about the industry? No, not for me. Personally, not for me. I experience fashion, I think, from probably all the tables, right? As a designer, as a trend reporter, as a researcher, as a historian, as an archivist. I think what this document does gracefully, I think we had the grace to have the opportunity to be a part of this project. And for me, that is like big. It's really huge. And I'm honored to have done this work. I'm actually honored. Just, WWD Fairchild Archive is like I say this all day. It's like a gold mine. Like, it's like, what? Christmas presents all the time. And we, I look at this archive in a position that we are today, where archives have become really important to documenting history and what the history was saying in the moment at the time. And Women's Wear Daily's coverage, like I said, it is really that. It is the history of fashion. You can look at it 20 million times. I mean, I can look at the paper, I can look at all these articles, like I said, 3 times and then go, wait, did I miss that? I mean, did I miss something? Is there something else? There's always something else, you know, but I think one that they coursed decades of just how important everybody was to fashion. It's not just Black creatives, Latin creatives, Asian creatives. They would have documented everyone in the moment because they were looking for first a lot. So they want, you know, the debut of this person, this, that, and all of that still sits in their content. You know, it's what they do on the daily. Yeah. So did it change anything? No, it just made me really excited that I could have this document sitting out there in the world.
Now you have this catalog in your mind.
Yeah, I'm like on the daily catalog. I'm a daily catalog.
Yeah, of course.
Just all the time looking for, wow, that's WWD. Or that they saw a brand, saw a designer, someone who's just stepped out and they're like, probably should pay attention. It's the same way they looked at Josephine. They would see a Christopher John Rogers in the same way. It's like, or they would see, you know, Sergio or anyone of making moments happen in fashion and sort of coursing through the business of what the business is and who is making the business, you know, kind of keep going, keep the conversation moving. Yeah.
I think for me, seeing how much was there makes me constantly think about how much else is missing from conversations across industries, just generally. You know, Jay Jackson, for example, he was creative director at Scherer.
Yeah.
But when you look in Scherer's history, his name is not there. It's like, what do you mean you missed one creative director? So I'm always now thinking about what else are we not seeing or being told. And the other thing is, you know, having spent so much time through all these decades and seeing how much we were covered, it felt like the media broadly regressed in terms of it, because a lot of the coverage you'll see in the book, the designers who were Black were covered as designers who were making fashion, but now we have to deal with Black designers and Black this and you know, kind of walking that line of, do you categorize them or do you not? And everybody who's creative just wants their work to speak for itself. So you know, both inspiring that we could have been so ahead early on and, you know, a reality check of all the work that needs to be done still.
You can take one more.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for such a wonderful conversation. And considering the importance of our visions and working in Elle magazine in London and work in various publications, why is it so difficult to just
Put it out.
get in? Yeah, just why are they omitting what we are doing? And there's always this one Black photographer, this one person in that
The only
situation. There's so many talented, and I'm just curious to know why is that? What are they hiding from? So this is something that we can think about as we marinate and we move on. And I got the book already online, so it does work.
Yeah.
On Amazon. So right now.
I will say this as a personal notation to that question, not from this document that is Women's Wear Daily, but I think that I always feel like we're always around. It is that thing that makes me know how great fashion is, because I look at fashion and I go, somebody is in the room. somebody's in the room. I don't need you to be only. I know that there are many. That's how I think about it. I don't really think I, that's why I said it's a personal sort of conversation for me. I'm like, yeah, we're there. We're in that room. We might not be in the front of the camera, or the names might not be sitting, because even in this document, the conversation is like, could you imagine how many people are just still behind the lens? They're never going to be in front of the camera. And also, not everybody wants to be in front of the camera. When we talk to the designers behind the themes of the chapter, we call it, Max Wilson, who some people may know, may not know, was very honest with us. I didn't have a desire to be the front man. That was not my goal. And I feel like that's okay. I think some of it is like, be okay with the fact that I don't like to say only. I never think there's only one, right? I think there's you and your assistants. There's Andre, and there's 5 other people assisting him. Somebody else on that team looks like him. And it's also who you're bringing in the room with you. Always bring somebody in the room with you, so they can bring somebody else in the room with them. And then you can have a conversation that's broader, that you can keep the conversation open and going and continuum. For this project, I think that we get to the 2020, right? And we know the reckoning of fashion. For this moment of Black creatives, then Tara and I look back and we see one article in WWD's Eye Pages in the 70s. That's why I say the 70s is so where I think we land in the conversation. And because we're looking at dialogue and constructs of Black, Negro, colored, sepia tone, we left that in the book for a reason, because we are looking at this sort of trail. Then we get to the 70s and the Black designer tells the press, we don't want that. We do not want the title. We're designers like anybody else. And through the 70s, we don't see so much of that, and that titling, that Black designer Stephen Burrows, no. Black designer John Higgins, no. So there is this thing about owning a space, and I think that the more they all say to you, oh, what? I know Black design. I don't know what that is. And I think that's important to sort of like reconcile. For me, it reconciled this idea that they're always there. We're always there. We're always in the room, right? Yeah, it's not this many people. It's always this many people. We just don't know those many people are there at all times. And I think, like I said, I think fashion is a curated space. It becomes more and more curated depending on what's trending, what's the lens. I mean, you can look at Women's Wear Daily. They don't sit as a magazine, but they do in a way, because their editorial coverage was constantly Black models, like for a long time. It wasn't like somebody was missing. I looked at WWD's advanced coverage. That's before anybody gets to see anything. They had sort of a carte blanche in that space for a very long time with their best of New Yorks and there's always a bevy of models. And that, to me, and the Black designer, and I think that for me personally, I'm not ever satisfied that I don't see enough Black representation out there, but that it's possible. It's possible for any media, any agent to say, well, this is fashion, right? And everybody's always there. And it shouldn't ever, to me, it is always about race. And I think it was Stephen Burrows who said, it never mattered to me. That wasn't what was important. It was important that I was doing my work, right? And making sure that my work and the thing that I'm doing is this thing that I want to do and represent.
I think I probably have a slightly different perspective. I think we still have a problem of box ticking. Like, oh, we need a Black person, got it. And I don't think enough people are looking at the work that these creatives are doing, because we're dealing with, a circling of creative directors, hot potato, they're moving around. And they still all look the same, the ones that they're cycling around at the different houses. So, and when we see certain designers and you see the work and you see it up close and you know the skill that they have, I don't think enough people are looking at their work or even looking for them. There's so many people who are like, there aren't enough Black designers, I can't find one.
But that's not true.
But you're not on the ground, you're not looking at what different people at different brands are doing, what their work is like. So I think we're not enough people are seeing what really we can contribute.
I'm going to add to her, but before we close, I also think there is a different idea of the global fashion system and the American fashion system.
So that's a London perspective.
Right. It's very different.
Yeah.
It's a very different idea.
Seeing and have some friends and
Yeah,
but they're there behind the scenes.
right. And as we talk today, right now, I don't disagree with what Tara's saying, but I will say there are always and always has been so much talent that didn't get into the press. But that does not mean that they're there. They're not there, right? Think about, this is New York. This is just New York. Just New York. And I say just because in a market that is fashion, there's Atlanta, there's Philadelphia, there's Chicago. There's so much, and there's so many. Detroit, right? And then if you open up that conversation to the international fashion idea, which is very different from America, then you can have a Virgil Abloh at a Louis Vuitton, preceded by a Pharrell, or Oswald Boateng, that many people may know, may not know, was first at Givenchy. They're in the room, right? And also, again, I think the business of the business, that's probably the part that sort of lacks in understanding, right? You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
I would love to invite you to go downstairs.
Yeah, which is great, which is beautiful.
A lot of information that we've talked about here, we actually have representation downstairs. And I think you're going to be very pleased with what you see.
Yeah.
On a small. We will be down shortly. We have to sit with our photographer for a minute. So I just want to say thank you, and I'll meet you downstairs.